Township High School Board meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Here.
Mrs. Lynn?
Here.
Mrs. Guerrero-Numer?
Here.
Dr. Huntington?
Here.
Mr. Coffey?
Here.
Mrs. Stiff?
Here.
Mr. Kennedy?
Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I want to ask everyone to remain standing. So before we get started, I want to acknowledge and honor one of our staff members that passed last month in a moment of silence. So we lost April Morgan. She had been employed with the district since 2005, and her last responsibility was teaching at River Valley. And so she leaves her husband and one adult daughter and 2 small kids. So I just want to, take time to honor her in a moment of silence. Thank you.
No.
So on behalf of the Board of Education, I welcome everyone, all of our guests that are here in person and those that are viewing via live stream. So thank you, and we appreciate your coming out. All right. So, can I get a motion for consent agenda?
So moved?
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Mrs. Lynn?
Yes.
Mrs. Guerrero-Numer?
Yes.
Dr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes.
Because we have no recognition and awards this evening, we'll go right into the superintendent's report.
Thank you. No correspondence or legislative information to share, but we're going to start off with Dr. Hampton sharing some really exciting information about the America's School Grant Award.
Yes, this is very exciting for the district. The Department of Energy actually had a competitive grant. It's called the Renew America School Grant. And it's all around solar energy, electrical vehicles, microgrids, things like that. So we had a consortium of 20 schools that applied for the grant as a unit, and we were awarded the grant. It's about almost $15 million. There is a proportionate share breakdown for each school, a 5% share for each school. So for us, roughly $1,083,000 was awarded to us. Our share is about $54,000, and it's to be used towards solar array, which is your solar panels, stationary charging storage, microgrid controllers and switch gears, infrastructure, superchargers, and electric school buses. So right now we're working with a consortium group that includes ComEd, Ameren, Highland Electric, Lion Electric, C Electric, Nuvi, Siemens, and UIC. Working with them to get more details in terms of what does this mean for us, what type of infrastructure, what would the true cost of that infrastructure be. And hopefully at the next board meeting, I'll have more specific details to provide. It's moving fast. I believe by October 1st, we have to submit the final application as a group. Some may drop off, some may stay, it just depends. But each entity is going through this process of what does the true cost mean for us? And in those different categories, what does that mean? The size, is it one school bus? Is it 3 school buses? Is it 2 superchargers? 1 microgrid? So we're going through that analysis now. But the exciting part is that we were awarded the grant. About 2 years ago, we submitted with 4 other school districts as a consortium. I believe that one's for $25 million. We didn't receive that one. So myself, Brian Shaw, the Director of Support Services, we continue to work with, his name is Tim Farquhar. He's from Southern Illinois School District, and he kind of leads the consortiums and us as a group. And so we're always looking at these opportunities. There is another grant opportunity out with the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, that's due in August. We're going to submit for that one also. So wherever there's opportunities where we could potentially either implement infrastructure at the transportation center, superchargers, electric buses, we're going to go after those. Those buses can cost anywhere between $250,000 to $400,000. So the support of grants is much needed if we're trying to move in that direction of electrical buses. But it is an exciting opportunity. It'd be a great start for the district.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
Something that I'm excited for and to see move forward. And I know that because of how ahead we were on some things when COVID came, that we were able to use money for other things. And I
Yes.
feel like this is something we're gonna already be ahead on.
Yeah.
That, down the line, who knows what requirements may be, we might be ahead on that. So
Yes.
I'm very excited about that.
Yes. Any other questions?
Thank you, and thank you to
Welcome.
both you and Brian
Thank you.
working on this. So we don't qualify for every single
Right.
grant that's out there, so we're looking for the ones we do, so thank you. All right, we'll move on to our first presentation. We have our Suicide and Depression Awareness and Prevention presentation, and to present the information to us is our PPS coordinators, Mr. John Randich and Miss Julie Edelman.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Julie, Brett Markham, and myself were tasked at having our annual review of our policy. So Brett, and perspective that we could bring to the table. As you know, it's policy 7290, and so annually we take a look at our policy. We just review it with the group that was in the previous slide, and we just get some input and make recommendations, if any. So part of that policy, we want to just acknowledge that we're always working at protecting the health, safety, and welfare of our students. We're promoting a healthy development, so that's something we always want to think about and use when we're planning any activities. We want to understand the significance and impact that mental health issues present to our students and their families. And just provide a safeguard if there's any attempt or threats or information that we get at school. So for our committee work this year, we met twice. It was in the second semester. We met after school for about just under 2 hours each time. It ensures, the first thing we do is we make sure we're ensuring that we're logging accurate information with our internal system. So that's something we take a look at. We also organize and plan any educational opportunities for the upcoming school year. We discuss any trends in cases, so we take a look at what numbers we have so far and take a look at that. And then we ensure all mental health information and services are available to families in their preferred language.
So to review the data, hello everybody. To review the data, this is last year's data. As you can see, I won't read it necessarily for you. We broke it down by the demographics. And then we did take a comparison then to this year's data. Taking a look at it, we did see a reduction at West and a slight increase at Centrals, but that's the breakdown. And then we broke it down further to what type of services that they received in regards to, was this an emergency room visit via ambulance, parents accompanying, SAS, and then there were times where parents then refused, but they acknowledged the need for an assessment. Here's a 7-year comparison. You'll see a real low dip at one point because we weren't in the building, but then you see the trends there. So some of the things that we take a look at is how we transition students back to school after a hospitalization, making sure that we have safety plans into place and that we have the team who needs to know on board and part of those safety plans, as well as confidentiality that we keep to a high standard, and make sure that families are on board and what they're comfortable with sharing with the classroom teachers as well as our PPS team and our support team. What came of this were some proposals for our procedure changes. Our assessment right now was not uniform, but we are proposing that it is now going to be a uniform assessment, as you see, or screener, I'm sorry, it's a screener that our staff will be using. Counselors and social workers, we are proposing that it's then universal, and then it then is uploaded to, once the plan is developed, it is uploaded into Infinite Campus under a counselor document so that it remains confidential and that teachers are shared only the information needed that would impact the classroom. That's all we have from there. Any questions? Sure.
Sure.
About the level of concern that we have.
So I'm gonna assume that if a student is in crisis, we're not gonna not provide intervention while we're completing this assessment?
Right, so that screener is just helping to guide the conversation, and that conversation then is uniform. You know, there are some certain obvious crisis situations where if we feel a 911 needs to be called, that we would call that, we wouldn't sit down and conduct a screener.
I have a question. I don't even know if this exists, but I had just read an article that 1 in 3 females have, that students or high school students have thought about suicide or think about it, and that's a high number when you look back. The female numbers are so much higher, so it definitely is a problem. I was just wondering, is there something that is a pre-screener of like kids
Like
who
a,
are?
yeah, like a needs assessment. There are times that our district has done needs assessment. That's something as part of our committee that we would like to, in the future, look at doing wider screeners as more of a proactive way of determining what the needs of our students are.
Mental health is definitely something that's increasing, like the need for, and after reading this article, I'm like, oh my gosh, 1 in 3 girls, and they have presented how they feel the need to just smile and move on and not actually be able to share their feelings because of being female and being like the good girl.
Right.
So, you know, just seeing the numbers that we have, how much higher our female numbers are than males,
Right.
it's very concerning.
Do we have a timeline for when we're gonna look into that? Because that is critical.
It is, and so some of the things that have been discussed as part of our committee is, you know, some of our buildings have 3,400 students, so you can't screen everybody at 3,400 because if they come back at high risk, you need to be pulling those kids down and then doing more of these types of individual screeners. So doing that in a very tailored way, making sure, you know, if you're gonna screen or do a needs assessment on 100 kids, make sure we have staff available, so if they do indicate in a high needs, that we can pull them down before the day is over. So yes, that is something that know that we would like to be able to do, as long as we can get a schedule and get that done quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, I want to thank you for pulling together all of this data. And that's the thing about our school district versus a lot of our surrounding school districts, and I'm saying this as a mental health professional. We have the data. We're more transparent with our data. We're honest with it. We have triangle teams and PPS. We have all of these things that come together. And a lot of the colleagues that I have at area hospitals are kind of impressed. They're like, oh, the school already has them with ThriveWorks. So they have them already plugged into different programs after school and within the school environment. And then talking about how all of our after school programs and sports do just try to bring in as many students as possible. And I just want to say thank you for the data. And then, yeah, going back to the screening tool, you're exactly right. It's a means of, it's directing the communication in the right way. You don't do it verbatim, so that the child actually feels that they can open up and give that information to you. So I just want to say thank you for continuing this work, and we really are like that ahead of the ball in a lot of ways. So thank you.
I have another question. Do we have anything, because I know as a parent, I didn't know things, and sometimes talking about suicide is very scary because you don't know what to say. But I have learned in the past few years, it's better to ask, like, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you like to actually have the conversations? But I don't know if I, 10 years ago would have felt comfortable saying that to my own kid. So is there things like that we can send out information to parents of like, how do you talk to your children about suicide?
So I know as part of our Suicide Prevention Week, we will be sending out additional information during that time to educate our families. That is a very heavy topic, though. So when it comes to, you're absolutely right, like, and our counselors and social workers are trained to know that if the kid is getting to a point, part of that screener is to ask that direct question. And that's something coming through a newsletter. I don't know if we'll probably do some helpful tips of what is gonna go out there, and that may be included in that.
Maybe something we need is like a small class or something to have for parents on how to talk to your kid about mental health and suicide.
So we are planning to create a structured partnership with NAMI. They already have work that they're doing in, I think, DuPage County, and they're getting back to us with what an MOU would look like. I believe it was JR,
Yeah.
Kelly, myself, like, we met with them this summer. And what we are looking to do as an enhancement to what we're already doing with the Prevention Week and information that we send out is NAMI partnering through the health curriculum, so it would touch all 10th grade students. And it would be over time, and they have a set curriculum that is specific to this topic, as well as bringing in adults who have struggled, like younger adults who have struggled, to talk about the stigma and some things that are associated. So we are looking to potentially enhance that education that it would get to every 10th grader in that very structured way.
Even so much having a class for parents in the community, because I know as a parent, like, it's an uncomfortable conversation. How do you have those conversations?
And we asked them about that, like,
Okay.
is there something then we would do through like a parent university or a partnership where we could have a parent component to it that we could run either during open house, and they're still learning about it, the Will County NAMI individuals, so they're learning from their counterparts in DuPage. But we asked about that because we thought that would be something really excellent to partner with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Guzman, for that reminder. But when we did meet with NAMI, what was nice about it was truly going to be a partnership with NAMI and our school district, meaning they wanted to do a short, PD with our social workers and counselors so that we can support them when they come in and vice versa, if they have any ways we can support them.
And they have community groups to support families of maybe a student or another member of their family that might be in crisis or suffering from mental health issues. And so I think there were a lot of opportunities there for developed partnership. And NAMI has been regularly coming to like our JREC meetings. And the one thing that we talked about going into next year, we asked them if potentially they could be maybe our first speaker at our JREC meeting in the fall. And if not that one, another one where then other community partners can learn more about what NAMI does so that they could get the word out too, and maybe strengthen those groups that they're running or increase access to the groups.
Sorry, just one last question. I know that Mrs. McDonald has talked about Panorama. Is that utilized as a universal screener in the district?
We have not used a screener, to my knowledge, and we use that a lot for
Panorama we gave
data.
last year as a school, yes.
So yes, it's a screener that's used?
It's a
Okay.
screener, but let Brett talk. I
So,
mean, that's not
It's
specific.
it's a little bit different. Panorama is a universal SEL screener, so it'll assess the core SEL competencies, right? And what we talked about in this committee was more specific to a suicide screener, which some schools will do. But as Julie mentioned, it's much more labor intensive. We need to be prepared for the response and the aftercare. So it would take we'd have to work with our community partners and have enough mental health professionals available to get through every student within that school day. So we have a general SEL screener that the Triangle teams use to target students for early intervention. But in terms of a suicide screener, which is something a little bit more specific, we haven't done that yet.
And you'll see some of the data from the cool down room too, because that's something new to our district that other schools aren't doing, as well. And there's been a lot of visits, and the individuals in those rooms are trained in how to have these conversations and screen students as well. So we have a lot of opportunities, but I know the question universally, that's not a question we have answered yet.
And when I answered that, it was directly related to that. So PE courses do SEL screeners as well, so that we have a general understanding of where we are with social emotional needs, but not necessarily directly related to, like the question that you asked, have you had thoughts of suicide or self-injury? Those kinds of more deeper level questions about
So
social emotional.
The other screener, if you see, there could be warning signs of like, they might need a little additional help, not necessarily suicidal, but just a little additional.
Correct, yeah. Mhm.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification too.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. We will move on to our next presentation, which is our annual presentation on prevention of and response to bullying, intimidation, and harassment. And we have Mr. Locke and Mr. Brett Markham to present this information.
Response to bullying, the prevention plan's right here. We have numerous methods, not only to put things out on our website and make things normally accessible to everybody, but we also have numerous times to where we meet with different groups in person to discuss harassment, intimidation, and bullying throughout the school year, as you can see on this slide. As far as the response plan, all formal complaints were investigated. Investigations were completed within 10 school days, and then finally, victims were provided with information regarding services that are available within the district and the community. And the evaluation and assessing of the policy outcomes and effectiveness. We collect data surrounding victimization all the way down through the bystanders intervention and or participation.
Just a quick overview of some of the data that we collected through this year. So we had 109 cases of harassment, intimidation, or bullying reported. 104 cases were founded. A variety of locations you see up there, most of them are in the classroom, but what I would say is that a lot of times there's multiple, so it could be in the classroom and electronic, right? But when they happen in school, typically it's in the classroom. The basis for founded HIB reports, so these are the categories that are outlined in school code for us to monitor. We'll talk later about a House bill that was recently passed. This list will get longer, and so with that high number and unspecified will be lower next year, just because we have more categories now to track. So some recommendations for the next year. We've got a lot of new deans on our team, so it's time for us to do a refresher of our procedures, make sure that we're following those with fidelity every instance of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. I think it's important to point out too, this isn't just bullying, it's also harassment and intimidation, so sometimes we forget that. So just time to do another refresher. Tanya has been patient with Steve and I as we've been updating our online shares site to make sure that our forms can be uploaded appropriately. Definitely going to incorporate this into our See Something, Say Something presentation, which we deliver to students at the beginning of the year, but then also refresh from time to time in our advisories. We're also, as we're pulling data, so you get to hear from us a lot tonight, so we apologize in advance, but as we're pulling data to monitor how we're doing, all of these fit together, so we'll be cross-referencing our discipline data with our HIB data to make sure that we're catching every case, that we're documenting everything appropriately. Because now this House bill was recently passed, signed into law, and there's more requirements on parent communication. There's more documentation that's required, and ultimately we'll have to upload our data to the state Board of Education moving forward. So just good timing for us to hit reset on this and make sure that we're following our procedure appropriately. Yeah, so a lot of times, we have the anonymous online reporting. We have through the website, through JT Web, students can report. I think it's JT Learn is what they see. But a lot of times, what we're seeing is students just coming in and reporting to staff members. Most of the time, that's how it happens.
Correct.
I have a question. I mean, most kids all have the app for grades.
Infinite Campus.
Is there any way through that app or anything like that that they can report anything?
So I think it would be fair to say that most of the time when students are accessing that, they're accessing it through their device. When they log into their device, they land on JT Learn, and there's a link right there where they can report it.
Okay. My other question is, do we have anything, not that it would be, the numbers would be this or anything, but if staff doesn't feel comfortable or feels this way, that, or they don't feel comfortable going to the direct boss of like, a set of procedures for that?
For staff,
Yeah.
like if staff feels intimidated or, so, we're gonna talk actually later about strategy 1.5, action plan 1.5, which is one of the things we adopted, and part of that is about staff reporting for like microaggressions or incidents where they're uncomfortable. So I don't know that there's anything formal at this point that exists, but,
There's not, but we also met with so we're all looking at each other, because Takara, Shad, and I met with our affinity group leaders this week too, and we talked about the same thing. It'd probably be something similar to our HIB that we can do on the website for microaggressions, and there might be some crossover where a microaggression could also be a intimidation or harassment, or it could fall in both, and so we'd probably have to cross-reference. That's our best way we can think about doing it right now, but through that, we did ask, there are some contacts that both of our affinity group leaders have, that they were gonna reach out and see if they have anybody who's doing this in a different way, even in different states. We were gonna gather to see if there's any other way of doing that, but we all agreed that that was probably the best way to do it going forward, at least in this school year, and that's something we'll share on opening day.
I know a lot of schools don't have that, so I'm not pointing out like.
If anyone has any ideas.
I know it's not like common, but like, it should be something out there. I'm not comfortable going to my direct boss of where do I go, what do I do, and just like a layout of, or maybe I see something with the student and I don't feel comfortable going to my direct, who do I go to?
The one thing though that, and we talked about this too, when we talk about that with staff, there has to be enough information entered that we have something that we can investigate. So we do want to talk about that too, because if it's just something very vague, there may not be something that we can potentially investigate. So to talk about HR, if you're not comfortable going to this person, going to that, and we have multiple complaint managers, male and female, at each building, as well as at the district, and just point that out to staff too, because sometimes, you know, you're more comfortable if you're female going to female, or male going to male, or depending on the context of the situation, vice versa. So that can be part of the information that we share, but it is very timely because we were having those conversations.
Is at least one of those people, a complete manager, a person of color?
At each school there would be.
Okay. So I'm gonna make sure at least at one school.
At each school there would
Okay.
be. Mhm. And at the district, actually.
Okay.
Any other questions?
All right.
Might as well stay up.
Thank you very much. And I know some of you are staying up there. Our last presentation and large presentation is, historically, this has been multiple smaller presentations, but we just felt that it needed to be put together with data components, as well as where we're at now, interventions and supports, and next steps. So I know I already shared, we're not going to go over each and every piece of the data. Happy to answer any questions. But I'm very thankful to the team. They worked really, really hard on this presentation. So I'll let them introduce themselves as they're talking, because I know Mr. Lockett just wants to get started.
No, I absolutely do. I will say that the team put me first intentionally because I was supposed to come up with something witty to kind of break the ice of this marathon of a presentation, but I have nothing. I absolutely have nothing. My wife texted me before I came in to tell me my son broke his driver that we just bought, and now I'm upset, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to move forward, and we're going to talk about exclusionary discipline and student support services. So with that being said, I am Steve Locke. I'm the assistant principal at Joliet Central. Brett Markham, assistant principal at Joliet West, will also be presenting tonight. Shelley Clark, director of strategic partnerships. John Randich, PPS Director at Joliet Central, Julie Adelman, PPS Director at Joliet West, and to start off, the Director of Student Support Services, Dr. Gilbert.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, this evening. What time is it? I'm not sure. It's all blending together. So to begin our presentation, we'd like to share with you just an overview of our enrollment demographics. The reason we start our presentation with this is very important to contextualize our student demographics, right? Who our students are as we look at further explanation of our office discipline referrals, exclusionary discipline, and interventions that we'll be discussing this evening. So to start with, this should be probably very familiar data for everyone, but just so you can see here, we have looking at our race and ethnicity, and again, these are the areas identified by our State Board of Education that represent both Joliet Central and Joliet West. Looking further at our enrollment demographics, we also like to consider our students with an individualized education plan, and you can see that represented here as well between our two buildings. And we also have our English learner status. So again, between our two buildings, what our percentages include. And then again, you can see the information there as it represents both buildings. Finally, we have our meal status with respect to students receiving free reduced lunch, paid lunch, et cetera, from Joliet Central and Joliet West. As we get further into our data and looking at our the demographics, you'll see this information translated in different ways as we look more specifically at the data and the rest of this presentation. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Locke as he begins looking at our discipline incident data.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert, for presenting the first 4% of this presentation. We will continue. I actually did count those out. So our discipline data broken down by campus. First and foremost, our ODR, our office discipline referrals. You do have the breakdown and the comparison from the 2021-22 school year to the 2022-23 school year. One thing I do want to point out on this slide is it looks like we had a lot more referrals, which I guess technically we did, but the point of emphasis that I want to make on this is that it was the tardies from Infinite Campus that were produced automatically through Infinite Campus and generated to the deans. So that is the one big glaring numerical difference between the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year. As far as discipline referrals in relation to federal race ethnicity, the numbers are up there between Joliet Central and Joliet West. I know you're all familiar with this because you have had the presentation. So please ask any questions if you have them as I proceed. As far as the discipline referrals based on IEP status, once again, Joliet Central, you can see the numbers right there compared with Joliet West from this past school year. Going into EL status, very similar to what Ms. Gilbert or Dr. Gilbert presented earlier. This is just breaking it down with EL status as far as the overall referrals, both at Joliet Central and Joliet West this past school year. Also, the meal status. You can see that the West and Central up there are portrayed, and obviously there's always room for improvement. That goes without saying. As far as district data and severe infractions, overall, there were some very positive gains between the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year. You can see a lot of them were a decrease within the past year, or they stayed relatively the same as far as referrals distributed at both campuses with severe infractions.
Can I pause?
Yes, you can. Yep.
So, I'm looking at this, total office referrals for the 22-23 school year.
Uh-huh.
And, a lot of, I see disrespect and class conduct. So that's like 1,900 referrals. And, African American, we only, when we look at the referrals, our white population is 30% at Joliet West, but our referrals are only 13%. So, as we're looking at this disrespect, to me, I'm wondering, does me as a white teacher interpret something that a student of color does as disrespect, but it's not disrespect to their culture? And is this where maybe some of these referrals are coming from? Because there's no reason to have 13% of white kids having referrals and that number decreasing, but our other races are increasing. And I keep asking this question is, why is this happening? And is there a specific number, like these referrals coming from teachers that are seeing disrespect? Is it disrespect? Is it a cultural thing? That's what I want to deep dive into, because these numbers aren't changing. I've been on the board 2 years now, and in 2 years, the numbers aren't getting better of our referrals being equally distributed between all races. And this is just disturbing. And to me, a lot of our referrals, like to me, those big ones of disrespect and class conduct can be attributed to a cultural differences between teachers and kids. And so what are we gonna do moving forward to understand that, to get those referrals down? And we, like, enough of we're making progress, like 1-2%, yeah, that's great, it's progress, but it's not enough, and it's not happening quick enough. So what are we gonna do moving forward to have it more equitable for our students?
So I do think as we proceed through the presentation, strategy 1.5 of the strategic plan and implementing a more systemic approach to restorative justice, I certainly think will help. Other than that, team, is there anything off the top of your head?
And I don't mean just like restorative approach, I mean, what are we doing for our teachers? So they understand what some cultural differences may be of, very well, a kid could be in my class and I say this is disrespectful, or not disrespectful, or I think it's funny, or I understand it's a cultural thing, but the teacher next door didn't get a referral for it. And how many times I've said to my students, now I may think this is funny, but the teacher next door is not gonna think this is funny, or the teacher next door may not do. So what are we doing with our teachers to get those referrals numbers down? Because it's not about restorative practice, it's about why are these referrals being written in the first place? Why is there so many more referrals being written on black kids for disrespect or for class conduct? And to me, the numbers, the percentages should be almost identical. And it's not getting better.
That's always the goal, right, is to be proportionate in our representation. So we're gonna continue with our cultural responsiveness cohorts. That's a huge piece of it. We're gonna try to expand our restorative justice cohorts. And ultimately, in strategy 1.5, a big part of that is gonna be student feedback, staff feedback. As we mentioned in the last presentation, that Steve and I are gonna be pulling referral data on a bi-weekly basis. So as we're doing that, trying to identify teachers who maybe need some support, maybe where there's just a disconnect with the students like you're talking about. And then just the other thing I would add is as you read research on restorative justice implementation, it really takes 5 to 10 years to see the proportionality start to level out. So there's a lot of research out of Denver Public Schools. They went all in on restorative justice, and research started coming out in 2016, and they're still disproportionate even today when they publish updates to that research. So it just takes a long time. It's kind of like turning a barge, because it's a systemic problem. It's not just here, but we certainly see it in our data too, right? So I think those are some of the things that we're going to keep doing, and just trying to support our teachers to meet the needs of our students better.
So let me ask this question in regards to the DEI training. Have we looked at that to make some adjustments or changes and talk to the consultants and share the data with the consultants, so maybe they can modify their instruction to do something a little differently to better support the teachers in understanding what that looks like.
So we have a plan to bring some of our cohorts together that we're specifically working with the cultural responsiveness. When we first started cultural responsiveness, it was not an application process, but it was who would like to partake in this. And for 3 years, we had a waiting list. And so I think we're entering into our 6th cohort. Last year, I think was one of the first years, correct? Okay, was one of the first years where we started adding individuals that didn't necessarily volunteer into it. So now we're adding, but with and we've talked to our consultants about that, it has to be a breakdown of people that might have an interest in going in and an interest, and people that maybe wouldn't have self-selected themselves in. And then obviously for this particular training, you have to have percentages of staff of people of color and white people. So there's a lot to consider with that, but this last year was the first year that we had individuals that didn't self-select to go into it. So we're gonna continue to do that.
Are we tracking the data of the teachers who go through the program to see, are they writing less referrals in students of color? Is it the same? Has it changed? Is it less than the teachers who haven't gone through the program?
I talked to Hanover about doing that, and we can do that in the future because we do know who the teachers are. There might be other variables at play though, but we could do a study like that with Hanover.
I do feel like something more needs to be done, and there's a reason the referral's being written, and I'm not, I mean, some are gonna be legit, but how many of these are a cultural thing? How many of these are because of, of race?
And so right now, in training, we're gonna continue on with the training, and I would say our in-depth training is the cultural responsiveness cohort and the restorative practices cohort. With new staff though, with our certified staff, we have the 4-year induction program, and we put in a cultural responsiveness track into there so that staff have access to that early on in their careers too. So we do keep adding things in, and then one of the things that I think we're gonna be more intentional about, as I think it was Mr. Markham just said, that looking at the data every 2 weeks and identifying and intervening if we see something that is occurring with a particular staff member to provide support and intervention. So that would be an additional approach too. And that was something that I know the board had talked about as well. Yep.
And you did name the event types that are more subjective, right? So one of the things that I think Steve's gonna mention as we look at severe infractions is when now I'm just speaking of race ethnicity, right? But when you look at race ethnicity of severe infractions with exclusions, that's a little bit more proportionate. So our staff who we've done a lot of training with on restorative justice, we're starting to see that reflected in our exclusion data. But to your point, that's why we have to monitor those more judgment call referral types, and I feel like we have a pretty good plan for it this year.
Okay. I just wanna make sure there's a plan, going forward, so next year when I ask the question. Because I've asked every year. That, our numbers are changing, and if teachers aren't making progress on, the amount of referrals we're writing for students of color, what's next? Or if they're going through this training and they're not implementing it,
Yep.
what next?
Right.
And that's the part I wanna know is, these are great plans, but what next?
Yep.
Right, yep, absolutely.
Thank you, and sorry.
Nope.
No, please,
It's
there's
quite
a
fine,
lot of
yes.
slides, so if and when you have a question, please do so.
So the Joliet Central data, as far as severe infractions, I'm happy to say everything did go down across the board, so that is positive. Well, it's a Joliet Central slide, Ms. Parker. All right, so, and then Joliet West, they had, everything went down as well, with the exception of fighting, which I do want to point out that the team did discuss. The data reflects the number of students in the infraction, not the number of incidents. Okay, so Joliet West absolutely made some strides too. Okay, severe infractions, the breakdown of Joliet Central, Joliet West, federal, the ethnicity and race for West and Central broken down right there as far as the severe. Moving into IEP status of students that received referrals. Continuing to EL status. And then severe infractions as far as free and reduced lunch and the students who pay for their meals. And that will move us into Ms. Clark with exclusionary discipline.
Good evening. So I'm going to discuss the expulsion data. This year we had 38 expulsions, which is about average if you look at the previous years. The 19-20 school year is lower because of COVID, and we ended the school year a little prematurely. Of the 38 students expelled, 20 were male students and 18 were female. 28 students were African American and 10 were Hispanic. This year, there was a higher count of sophomore students who were expelled. Also, if you look at the data, you'll see 9R, 10R, 11R. Those are when we were using the term GAP students. We're no longer using that term. That was for students who were credit deficient. So you'll see that that is tailoring off now. This year, 30 students were expelled from West and 8 were expelled from Central. As you can see, this fluctuates by year just depending on the circumstances. This slide shows the expulsions per month. There were more expulsions in second semester because we are providing more interventions and using expulsion as a last resort when possible. All students are recommended to Lincoln in lieu of expulsion unless the student has an IEP and the team determines its placement.
Okay, so in terms of out-of-school suspension, this slide has a comparison year to year. So overall, our exclusion data is mirroring our severe infraction data. So you're seeing a decrease from 21-22 to 22-23. So that means fewer days of school lost for our students, which is a positive. Here it is again, just with a comparison and a percentage of change from year to year. And then disaggregated by race, the suspension data. Again, I pointed this out earlier, but while not ideal and not anywhere close to where we want to be, our exclusion disaggregation is closer to how our referrals, our severe infractions are disaggregated. So obviously still work to do, but in terms of decreasing the suspension, that's a good first step for us and a place to start from.
I have a question about the out-of-school suspension information. So I know at the beginning, when Mr. Locke was talking, there was some laughter, and I believe that was about between East or West and Central, but when I look at the number of students suspended out of school, to me, this is a crisis. And just being at a few board meetings or closed sessions where we talked about some of the expulsions, many of those students refused the interventions or didn't participate in the supports and services and were allowed to choose out-of-school suspension instead of going into some of those programs and services. I would like this board to look at out-of-school suspension being removed as an option for some students. Now, I'm not talking about students with guns or weapons or great bodily harm. Those are different issues. But when I see kids out of school suspended for excessive absences and tardies or refusing to go to a program so they have to go out of school, you know, you can take out of school suspension out of the outcome list, right? It could be you did this infraction, and instead of a 5-day out of school suspension or the program, it should be the program. Kids that aren't in school, the research is perfectly clear, out of school suspension does not fix the problem. It only exacerbates the students' issues and concerns and puts them further behind in school. And that is clearly evidence in the graduation rate of this school. And so I think as a board, part of our work, looking at policy and procedures and practices, I think that needs to be something that is discussed, because to me, this is a crisis.
Dr. Huntington, I totally agree with you about the out-of-school suspensions. And the thing is we have to have parents believe in us. And when I see 47% of Black kids that are getting expelled, or I forgot what number I was looking at, I'm sorry, I'm lost in my data. But when I see numbers like this of how much discipline our Black students get, how can parents have trust in us as a school that we're gonna provide safe and good services and believe in us that we're doing the best interest in their children when we're writing referrals on them? And I think like what you're saying has to go hand in hand with fixing why and how these referrals are being written. Because I agree that out-of-school suspension is not the best policy, but we have to build that trust within the parents who want them to have their kid in our triangle groups and things like that.
So I understand that there may be an issue of trust, and there is opportunities to build that trust over time. Obviously, it can't be an overnight fix. But what I'm suggesting is, if the practice is, well, it's a 5-day suspension, but we can keep you in school and keep you on track for your classes if you go to this program, that should not be an option. That should be in the list of interventions or disciplinary infractions that occur. Like, sitting home for 5-10 days should not even be in the mix, quite honestly, outside of drugs, weapons, and great bodily harm.
Sexual violence. Also, just really quick, I wanted to make sure we do not give OSS, out-of-school suspension, for absenteeism. Is that correct?
And the data did show that there was out-of-school suspension for truancy.
Is that accurate, though? Because I thought we don't use it for,
So I'd have to go back and look at those specifics. So if there's a truancy where a student had left the building, externally left, and then returned, typically we do offer our
That's
ISS
different,
program.
yeah.
Right, but typically it goes to ISS, and if the student's refusing to go to ISS, then it does escalate to an OSS. That's
So
usually
that's
the
di- yeah.
progression.
And that's
That's the
different, but-
truancy. It's not, I'm absent from school for 10 consecutive days, now you come back and we externally suspend you. No, that's not our response.
just want to make sure,
Yep.
clarify.
Yeah, I would consider sexual assault a great bodily harm, so I understand what you're saying there.
I'm like 100% agreeing with what you're saying, but keep losing my train of thought. Counseling and services and interventions only work if there's buy-in. Like, you can go to like a court-mandated counseling session and you can sit there in silence and it's not gonna have any effect or change in your behavior. So before we just mandate that kids do this, we have to have the buy-in. Because we can mandate anything, and unless the parents and students believe that it's a valuable program, it's not gonna work. We can force kids to sit there and stare, but there's gotta be the buy-in, and the buy-in comes in with the trust. And I'm 100% agreeing with, like, that would, in the ideal world, all parents want their kids to get these services, but unless there's this trust trust / a cultural thing, as in some cultures, and you don't go to counseling because you don't spread your business elsewhere. And so there's gotta be this work with parents to get them, like you said, a systemic system of this whole thing is systemic system of, and I agree with this, ideally, that would, in an ideal world, that's what it should be, but you can't force someone to sit in a counseling session and then it's just gonna work.
Right, no, it doesn't have to be a counseling session, it just doesn't need to be sitting at home with no supervision and no support for your educational and academic needs. Okay, so what I'm suggesting is, you can open the opportunity, you can have conversations, you can process individual with a student if they're in a program or service instead of going and sitting at home. You don't have to force anybody to talk about what the concerns or issues are, But what I'm suggesting is if the option is not to sit home, and we're gonna continue to support you in your educational program, that should be the first, that shouldn't be an option. That should be, this is the first intervention. This is the disciplinary consequence. Then this is the disciplinary consequence. If you get to out-of-school suspension, at least you have done several interventions prior to sitting and looking at an expulsion.
I agree 100%, because when our students are successful, our community is successful. So it's almost like it's the pipeline of prison, right, when they're out of school. I understand that. For me, I think it's about the relationships that our students have with adults in the schools. And our adults should, and I'm not saying they don't, but if we try to foster better relationships with our students and actually talk to them, not at them, or in a condescending fashion. And because I've been a teacher, I know what it's like, I understand. I think that is so critical for our students. And when they come to school and they don't have adults that believe in them, that care about them, these are the things that they do. So that's what I have to say on that.
I think we're saying the same thing, Mrs. Steph. I think, but that's what I'm saying. If you're sitting at home, you don't have access to a caring adult who cares about you and can build a relationship,
I'm not
right?
disagreeing with you. All I'm saying is, if we don't take action and the students are still in school, if there's no relationship, they're still not going to open up and talk to anyone. They'll sit there.
That's what I mean by, we're all saying the same thing, I just think we're saying how we get there might have to be looked at, as like, where I'm saying, you know, why are these referrals being written, and building the trust and the relationships. So I think we're all saying the same things, we just need to figure out how is the best way to get to that end solution.
So, just a couple things, because I know the board, gets the monthly exclusionary discipline report and is able to review that. And so from looking at that, and I know we have newer board members and, that weren't here the whole year. However, in looking at that, you're able to see the offenses that students are given out-of-school suspensions for. And so I think putting in the things like Catalyst, and putting in the substance abuse clinician with our Think First modules, and there's more data in there. I think things like that is where we saw decreases in assignment of out-of-school suspensions. We did see more out-of-school suspensions as the year progressed, because students were assigned like a detention, or they were, you know, they had a restorative conversation, and then the behavior continued. And so maybe they got a detention, social type of situation, and then ISS. We didn't see students being put on out-of-school suspension for tardies, except when they started getting 80 tardies, like where they were perpetually late to class and we had tried to intervene in multiple different ways. So, you know, I would just need direction from the board as to how you want us to, you know, not use out-of-school suspension, because even when, so as an example, for a first drug offense, let's say a student is found to have THC, we do send them home that day for medical. We don't know if they ingested it or didn't ingest it, so we make sure, A, they have supervision when they go home so that they can be monitored, and if it's their first offense, they come back the next day. So there's actually, you know, and then if it continues again, then I guess, again, there's like progressive discipline. So if there's anything that the board is seeing that we're not, you know, doing, we're like, we would want that feedback. Our deans and our deans are having conversations and PPS coordinators about Catalyst, and the Catalyst data is in here too. But part of being in that program is acknowledging that you made a mistake, understanding the mistake you made, so that you can partake in the program. So many students have taken us up on that, but when they don't, then there isn't a mandate per se, and we've had students and parents flat out tell us that they're not gonna do what is said in Catalyst. And then, so what then? So on the first instance, we're not gonna necessarily expel. If we wouldn't have expelled, it would go to an out-of-school suspension, but then if they do the same type of severe infraction again or similar, then we go to that. So I would love to enter into that discussion, but I also want to make sure we're understanding, like, we're layering in those interventions, and this is how we're approaching it, because we want the same things. And we talked this year about how can we, is there ways we can be more persistent with families and with students? You know, building relationships, making sure that there's an understanding of why this intervention is so important for this and for the future, with that and problem-solving circles and those different things. So, you know, I guess just what would we be talking about to go forward into next year, except getting better at having the conversations with students and parents, and then layering in more opportunities for intervention. Like, are there more types of infractions that we talked about that would lead to Catalyst or things like that? So those are the things we did this year where I think we saw some successes, and we will continue to track these because we see them as the same level of importance. There would be nothing that I would disagree with about, like, it's not good for kids to be excluded from school. Like, it's not in their best interest, absolutely not. You know, how do we move forward in a productive manner to make sure, to safety and security, as well as making sure we're meeting the needs of all of our students. So we'll continue to have that conversation and looking at what other schools are doing. And again, working very hard to improve our relationships with students. And I know, Mrs. Stiff, you said, like, it's not that staff aren't doing that, but we want to get better at it with all staff. Because I also want to really state, we have great staff that are working really hard, and the majority of our staff have really good relationships with kids. And when we identify that a staff member doesn't, we do work with that staff member, and at times, sometimes that staff member can't stay. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. We have wonderful staff working with our kids.
I don't mean, when I say this stuff, I don't mean that we don't have staff. I know we have wonderful staff here. But I do know that these numbers are concerning, and I look at it and I'm like, okay, what's going off? And you can be a wonderful staff, but still maybe not recognize your own microaggressions and write those referrals.
Absolutely.
Well, I think I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was reading information from the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Assistant Superintendent in Elgin. And she made a comment that I found so profound, and it was just, suspension and expulsion is not gonna increase your school culture, right? So trying to find other ways to support all students, all families, all different backgrounds is essential. And I get that, and I think we have some amazing, that's one of the reasons I asked to go view all these programs right away, was because I was like, well, this is a lot that we're doing here, let me learn more about it. And I think using that staff to build those relationships, to talk to the parents about those kind of things, invite them in. There's a lot of strategies that you could do to open up the door and pull the curtain behind these things that can help parents support the work that staff is doing. And I just think that students that get excluded from school and then can't keep up and continue into this vicious cycle of infractions and not getting the services that they need, and then we end up talking about expulsion, and they're 9 times out of 10 probably don't finish high school.
What I was gonna say was, the people who having the conversations with the parents, are they the staff that has been through the trainings? Are they the staff that look like the parents? Or, you know, am I just sitting here as a white woman telling a parent of color that this is the best option for their student? Like, we need to make those relationships with the parents and bring it to the parents level, and with people who look like them and understand the culture that they're coming from. And I think that is maybe a way to start about having those conversations so we can get more kids into the Catalyst program. Is being aware of who is having the conversation with the parents, and is the parents feeling comfortable? If one person isn't making progress with the parent, maybe can we bring someone else in to say, okay, maybe, so-and-so didn't explain it in the way that you needed it explained, what can I do for you? Maybe that parents are to the dean, I'm not putting blame on that, but maybe we need to have someone else come in and have these conversations with the parents, or maybe have the conversations with parents when their emotions aren't already heightened, maybe a day later.
The
A little
relationships
further-
can't start when students
Or elevated.
exhibiting
Yep.
difficulties. They need to start at the beginning of the school year, and when students are doing well and saying something positive about the student. That's when the relationships start. It doesn't start when the student is acting out.
I
just wanna
couldn't
go
agree
back
with
to-
that more on how the PPS staff can start developing relationships earlier before we're reactive to a behavior. In a little bit, when I touch on Catalyst, we'll talk about how those meetings take place, who's represented at those meetings, how we utilize cool-down time before we're making an emotional decision to accept Catalyst or not. So I'll get to that a little later on in the presentation.
Ready for the segue to ISS? All right. So ISS, formerly known as in-school suspension, is now known as intensive student support. When we started our restorative practices, we realized pretty early on that we needed to change that name. And so at both campuses, that's the name change. But fundamentally, it's not what we do to students, it's what we do with students. So that's kind of a little bit of the background there with calling it intensive student support. Uh-oh, it froze. Sorry. There you go. So what you'll see here is, and we did have an increase in the numbers of ISS assignments. So the previous discussion by the board was talking about what else have you done other than suspensions. You can see here that we did increase our number of ISS assignments. We do look at that as those were students that stayed in school. So we were able to do intensive student supports with them in our ISS room instead of suspending them out. Furthermore, we've had discussions with our deans moving into next year. Typically, in years past, we would assign ISS for 1 day. We're looking at now assigning for 2 days. So hopefully that would also help with looking, when we're looking at the infraction and what the appropriate discipline is, we're proposing that we're going to use ISS for multiple days instead of generally just one. Also, we've had a room change at each campus, so I can speak for Central. We're going to be able to double our capacity each day with the amount of students we're sending to ISS if needed, and so that will not be, it'll be more of an immediate assignment. Much of this demographic information is similar to the out-of-school suspensions. This one talks about our common teacher expectations regarding the classroom environment, the relationship building, the norms of what a classroom should look like each day. We're expecting our teachers to greet students at the door. We are encouraging them, or it's an expectation that they learn the correct pronunciation for students' names. Clearly articulate what the expectations are. It's not good to surprise teenagers or any learner, so clearly communicate what those expectations are. We're going to continue to ensure every minute matters, and we're going to model respectful interactions and communications. So with our dean interventions, we wanted to make sure you saw this information. So yes, for many infractions, there's a consequence that's assigned, but there's also interventions that take place. Some of them noted here. We do some intervention cards. We do safety passes. Our deans do quite a few mediations. We do a lot of mediations with our students. It's a proactive measure. And our students are coming around to being more interested in doing mediations than they were just a few years ago. So we're seeing more mediations in dean's offices. This was important because back in the day, deans would get students in and out, in and out, in and out of their offices. And when we adopted the restorative approach, it does take more time for deans to process through students through a behavioral infraction. 7 steps is quite a few more than what it used to be. And we do know that that will make a difference. So we also utilize detentions. That is new this year as well. And so this past year was the first year. Most of the assignments for ISS are due to tardies, that disrespect and hall class conduct, some cafeteria disruptions, things that we would consider minor infractions. Please note that it is at the dean's discretion, but generally speaking, those are the qualifying infractions. Program logistics, students are assigned 1 or more days in their lunch advisory. Lunches are served up there. Our staff gets certified to handle cold lunches, and so that can take place. We're going to be able to populate attendance this year using the Infinite Campus scan system. And then if students that miss a detention, our detention supervisors will make more of a concerted effort. Our detention supervisors weren't in place at the start of the school year, and so I don't know exactly the start date, but they started, I know, 1 in September, 1 kind of October. And while they did a good job, we're still looking to add staff in that area. We have allotted for 2 in that area. We've only had 1 in each one. But with that being said, we're looking at using a detention tracker to increase communication between the dean and the supervisor. You can see the breakdown for detention assignments. Like I mentioned, the vast majority are for disrespect, tardies, and some minor infractions. I briefly mentioned this, but some of the improvements we're looking at for next year, we're looking to hire paras, 1 for each campus for a total of 2. Which puts us at about, we're looking somewhere in the number of about 30 students per lunch period at each campus. We need some more training for our student management system. So our iCampus does have a detention tracker. It was utilized, but there's some components that we can use better, and so we're going to have that ready to go for our supervisors. And that tracking document is the one I was talking about before, where it's just it's essentially a workflow between the dean and the supervisor to know pertinent information.
Before you leave, sorry, you talked a lot about the deans and the restorative conversations, and that's fantastic. How are teachers looped into those? Because if the harm happens in the classroom, then the teacher should be involved in those conversations?
Yeah, so the approach is that if there's an incident that comes out of a classroom, in most cases, generally speaking, the dean invites the staff member. So that staff member, then we find a time when we can meet, and we try to do essentially a restorative circle with them.
So I see that we really didn't identify where the referrals were or the behavior was happening. So were most of them in the unstructured areas or in the classroom, to be able to identify, well, if it's in that unstructured areas, then we need to do something differently with our security. So I didn't see that piece in the report.
I'm not sure if we have that information.
I mean, we have it, right? So, and we do look at it. So what I would say is for detentions, those minors, it's a mixture of places, right? But we know when we go back to our more severe infractions, those are typically in unstructured areas. And so Steve and I have been meeting quite a bit since July to talk about, and with Ed as well, about how are we going to work with security to better support students in those unstructured areas? How are we communicating building-wide expectations, right? Because we can be restorative, we can establish norms, but there's also just expectations for how a school functions. That's important to making everybody feel safe. And so we are going to work on some things with our security staff, monitoring the cafeteria, clearing hallways, right? So at the beginning of the school year, we're asking for teachers to, on their plan, we'll pay them to help monitor the hallways, clear the hallways, make sure kids are where they're supposed to be, and not take them to the dean, but just take them to class, right? Because we want them in class. So we're going to try to intervene early, and then just monitor it throughout the year.
Thank you.
Did you say teachers were gonna do that during the holiday?
In addition to security. So we already have security, but in addition to that, because early in the year with the freshmen transitioning in, there's more of a need to help students remember where they're supposed to be, get used to high school, which is much different in terms of passing periods than what they might have experienced at Troy or District 86. So early on, we're gonna use teachers as a supplement to our security staff.
So before all the teachers are needed to sub in classes?
Yeah, you can tell, you know, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're being optimistic, Dr. Huntington.
Got it. Thank you.
Something else I wanted to just highlight in the relationship between the detention and ISS numbers, we are trying to reduce our ISS numbers as well. Students who do not attend their detention, the pairs are being utilized to call parents. They get 3 opportunities to either reschedule with their dean or we reschedule on their behalf before it gets turned into an ISS where they're avoiding those detentions. So we're really trying to reduce those numbers as well. We're usually, trying to use those resources to do so and get that buy-in, that relationship. So if the parents, well, I didn't even know they had detention, okay, well, let's make sure we're bridging that gap and getting them in detention, not necessarily in a full day of ISS. Okay.
So I am going to be speaking about the Regional Safe School Program, which we refer to often as the RSSP at Lincoln. JTHS partners with Lincoln School as an alternate placement for students in lieu of expulsion. Students placed at Lincoln in lieu of expulsion are required to spend the duration of their expulsion at Lincoln. If a student fails to attend Lincoln School in lieu of expulsion, the student is immediately expelled from JTHS. This data is going to be repetitive because it lines up with our expulsion data again. So we had 38 students this past school year. 8 of them were at Central, 30 were at West. We had 16 sophomores, and then you guys can see the breakdown for the class. The racial demographic of the students who attended RSSP were 28 African-American students and 10 Hispanic students. Here are the outcomes for the students who were recommended to attend Lincoln RSSP program this past school year. We also use Lincoln for our TAOP program, which is the Truant Alternative Optional Education Program. We partner with Lincoln to provide an intervention for students who are chronic truants. Truant students placed at Lincoln are monitored semester by semester regarding their progress to determine whether they are able to return back to JTHS. We had 24 students attend the Lincoln TAOP program this year, 19 from Central and 5 from West. There was a decrease in this, and the decrease was because Lincoln did not receive the grant that they normally do for the TAOP program, so that's why you'll see the 60% decrease this year. Here are the student outcomes for the students who were recommended for the TAOP program. Here you're able to see the demographic information for the students who were in the TAOP program. And then all students who return back to JT, we have transition meetings to help them successfully return to their home campus. In that meeting is myself, which is, I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships, deans, JTHS counselor, Lincoln School counselor, the parent and student. Next, I'm going to discuss our problem-solving circles program. This school year, 405 students were placed on behavior warning. 247 submitted paperwork to begin the problem-solving circles program. 136 families successfully completed the program. 195 families out of the 247 that were referred participated in the process. We had 59 families that began the process but did not complete the program due to disqualification for not completing the process and not responding to various communication attempts. These are the outcomes for our students who were enrolled in our problem-solving circles program. Here you can find the demographic information of students who participated in PSC program, and it's broken down by year in school, race, and gender. We have been utilizing the Problem Solving Circles program since 2012-2013 school year. We have had 720 families successfully complete our program. And we always want to thank our community volunteers, because if we did not have them, we would not be able to run our program.
All right, so the next set of interventions we're going to look at are interventions for substance use in school. You know, if you've been on the board for any time or followed what's been going on, we've come a couple of times in the last few years to try to ask for resources to support our students in this area, because we do feel like it's a significant need in our community. So the two options that we have right now are Rethink modules. So this is a partnership with Linden Oaks Behavioral Health. They initially developed this with Plainfield schools, and came highly recommended from Plainfield. It's implemented during ISS. There's online learning modules. At the end, the student completes an assessment. Based on that assessment, it goes to Linden Oaks staff, and if they, depending on the level of usage that is indicated through that assessment, their families are contacted by Linden Oaks staff to offer an in-depth assessment, which is free to families. Linden Oaks does free assessments for students. We also this year added our substance abuse clinician, which was, again, a new position. Ms. Amber Mitchell, she travels between the two campuses. She works as our BHT partner contact, right? Because a lot of the time, and we'll get into the data in the next couple of slides, but when you talk to her, as she does her assessment of students, the level of usage is high for our students, right? By the time they're getting to us as ninth graders, they're using frequently. It's not early usage, like what typically you would have expected from high school students. They're deep in use, and so they require a higher level of support. In terms of office discipline referrals for substance abuse, there's a comparison from 21-22. We added Rethink in January of that year, or March maybe, and then 22-23 when we had both programs for the full year. So we did see a decrease. We also saw a decrease in students who were repeating substance abuse infractions. Again, just like everything else we talked about, while that's a win and a positive that we're seeing a decrease, there's a lot of work to do, as you can see, right? And also just anecdotally, these are students who were caught, right? We don't think that this is all of the usage our students have, so we have a lot of work to do in this area. In terms of students who participated in the interventions, again, it's a mix, right? Rethink is intended to be early use. So a student's not going to go through Rethink multiple times. If they did it last year, they're not going to do it again this year. So we had 180 students participate in the Rethink modules. We had 189 students referred to Ms. Mitchell this year, which, if you know anything about social work caseloads, it's essentially like having a student with an individualized education plan. It's time intensive, number of minutes that have to be met. So it's a pretty high caseload. You know, and so we just outlined for you her process with those students. In terms of improvements for next year, we're going to refresh our training. So Linden Oaks is going to come back in and work with our ISS staff, because we do have some new staff members, just to help them make sure they're implementing that program with fidelity, monitoring students appropriately. We're going to try to work, this is something that Plainfield talked about. Tim Elbor is over there. He and I talk about this quite a bit, trying to get the students to engage in that parent session after school. Because that is an important session. When we've had parents participate, the feedback is always really positive. So we want to really focus on getting parents involved in that process. In terms of Ms. Mitchell's position, as we showed, the number of students being referred is very high. So some of the things she's going to do, she's going to screen each student when she initially meets with them. She always offers outside options, right? Because there's only so much you can do in a school setting. It's not a clinical setting. Many of our students qualify for intensive outpatient programs based on their level of usage, which again isn't something we can mandate, right? But she's frequently talking to parents, offering those options. There's a variety of low-cost options. She's a part of the Will County Substance Abuse Coalition through the Will County Sheriff's Office, and so she's very familiar with what those options are. So we're going to continue to work with her and empower her to bring those resources to our families and provide more structure and support.
So I know that we have a high amount of students that vape.
Mhm.
And, you know, I have a senior who does not, but he
Good for you.
knows about it, right?
Yeah.
And I asked him, where do you think students get it from? He said, oh, Cuddy's.
Yep,
Cuddy's sell it to them.
yep.
So are we doing anything about that? Like, I went to one of our city council members
Mhm.
to share what my son told me, and she said, well, we'll have to do a sting, and I don't know if it was done.
Yeah.
But I think we need to work in collaboration with our city council to put a stop for these businesses selling to our young kids.
Absolutely. So similar conversation, we all know that name, right? That is where our students go. So we have our school resource officers in the building, Detective Price, and Detective Batong, and we've had this conversation with them too. The city does do stings, right? So they'll go in and do a sting, they write a ticket, it's a pretty costly ticket, right? They can only do that so often. But I think the more that we can work as a community to try to address all of these things that we're talking about, right? The better off we're gonna be. We need to, we're working with District 86 to try to increase our collaboration with them on the transition process all the way through. But it's not just a school issue, right? It's a community-wide issue. It's drugs, it's physical violence, not taking advantage of mental health. I mean, the fire department, we're gonna talk about ThriveWorks later. There's free mental health counseling available to anybody who lives in the city of Joliet, and for our students, anybody who goes to school with us. So if people will take advantage of those things and we get everybody to buy in, that's what it's gonna take to really address exclusions, community violence, right? All of those things are connected. So all of the help that we can get to do that, to address that and work with the city, we're all here to be a part of it and work together.
I have a question also. This is great, all the things that we do for kids who use. Do we have anything for kids of addicts? You know, kids, if your parents are addicts, you're more likely to be an addict yourself. I just researched like Alateen and things like that, like what kind of programs, and there's no programs around here for teenagers. So do we have anything for kids of addicts? Maybe it's one parent, both parents, or these kids might be using because their parents may be addicts. Do we have any type of programs for students, and maybe we can even stop it before it, you know, begins long-term by having those type of programs for kids of addicts?
We don't currently have any formalized programs. A lot of it is individualized work by our social workers and our counselors, right? Meeting with students, counseling them, providing them supports. I mean, it's definitely an issue, right?
I think the group work is important, so kids know that
They're not alone,
They're
yeah.
not alone, and that they're normal. You know, like there's other kids like them out there, and I think one of the big things with kids is that they don't want to seem different or be different,
Right.
but to see kids who are experiencing the same traumas as they are is valuable. But something to think about of having groups for kids specifically for addicts, whether, you know, a parent might not recommend them, but maybe a parent, you know, it's a single parent whose the other parent is, or maybe a teacher knows that their parents are, that we can make these recommendations to get kids into different groups, because there aren't a lot of resources for teens of addicts.
Well, I was gonna say, and with Alateen, it comes and goes, kind of like our Al-Anon groups in Will County and Joliet, as a kid who went to Alateen. And it just, I was in flow, just like our mental health groups. I was in flow at my job, but one of the things is just the mental health portion of it, because it's tied in also with poverty and all the other systemic issues.
I was gonna say, NAMI.
Yes.
That's an opportunity as we develop this partnership, because they do have, these types of groups. And we talked about maybe part of a partnership would include that they potentially could host some of these groups on our campuses, because after school, then we have activity buses and things like that. So they do have lists of things that they do in different places. They don't run them at all times,
Yeah.
because I did ask that question, but they did have those types of things that I would say they might not be called that, but they were comparable.
It's hard
Yes.
it's hard to find those things
Yeah.
out there, and I know that the closest Alateen is Mokina. and that's still far.
And then, well, again, with Alateen, there can literally be a group next month, and it'll go on for 2 years, and then there won't be one for 6 months, and then it'll go again, because it's all, member participation. But NAMI does have great groups, and again, even them, it ebbs and flows with who participates. But we do have a lot of group counseling that starts early, with all of our kids here, from Guardian Angel to other, and having the availability of ThriveWorks, et cetera.
And what you shared about co-occurring, see, I learned because my social workers
Yes.
teach me, right? But when you talk to our staff, Amber especially, who's a CADC and a LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, certified alcohol drug counselor. So many times with young people who are using, it's co-occurring with a mental health struggle, trauma, anxiety, lack of coping skills. So while we don't have anything directly to work with students who are children of people who are addicted, those other resources that we have for mental health help us to at least open the door to have those conversations.
Yeah, because the co-occurring is, out of this world, and it all goes together. I was just gonna say, the Will County State's Attorney's Office Child Advocacy Center groups start September 6th, and they go throughout the school year, and we have children that come from all of those different co-occurring disorder families. So they're out there again, but they don't have that name.
Now that I played amateur social work, I'm gonna turn over to a real social worker.
Those acronyms are great.
Answering all of our
Yeah.
questions. You did a very nice job. You do listen, Brett. I like it. Which brings us to Catalyst. I think we were jumping ahead a little bit earlier, so hopefully I'll be able to answer all of your questions as I go along. Thankfully, most of you were able to tour both of our campuses and see our actual rooms. I think Central's campus is actually going to be relocating to meet some of the needs as we see them occur throughout the year. So they're getting a larger space and some more resources within their setting. So our goal of the Catalyst program, I won't read it directly to you, but it is to definitely get our students to have engagement academically, socially, emotionally, and to reflect on their behavior. But it's a holistic approach. It's not just the social worker and the para that is running the program. There is follow-up groups as well as the dean, counselor, and yes, social worker and classroom teacher that takes part in supporting the student throughout the 3 days, the 8 weeks of follow-up, and then every student that leaves the program will have a suggestion, a recommendation for the Triangle team through their Catalyst coordinator to be reviewed and then followed up as they leave the program. It is a one-time intervention. It is 3-day assignment. It is volunteer, although when we approach that with our families, and typically when we approach that with our families, we like to have them in person. When a student is being picked up, if emotions are too high, we will schedule that at the next day. Many times because we do want the coordinators to be the Catalyst coordinators to be part of that. And typically they're in the classroom just like a classroom teacher is running the program, so we don't always like to pull them unless we're trying to accommodate a family member who maybe left work, can't leave the next day. And we try to then make sure that there's been time to be able to process that information. Emotions are reduced so that they can make an educated decision, not an emotional decision. And as I mentioned before, there is 8 weeks of follow-up. The re-entry contract, which is after the 3 days, the student as well as the Catalyst coordinator is sitting down saying, okay, what are we gonna do to be successful? Not just for the behavior that brought you in here, but they've also now identified if there were other needs, academic needs, attendance needs, ongoing other conflicts that may not even been connected to this, because we want ongoing success. So there's a contract, and that contract isn't meant to be punitive. It's an agreement upon the supports that we have in place, as well as the students' change in behavior. So here are some of the eligibility criteria in regards to what would bring you to the Catalyst program. These are students that are facing a 3 to 10 day out of school suspension. And in some cases historically could have gone to the board for expulsion. So we're reducing that and trying to have the greatest amount of influence by keeping a student in the building. 'Cause as we said before, we know that's where we're gonna have our greatest amount of influence and success when a student is not just supervised, but also trying to build relationships, yes, with the Catalyst coordinator, but also the dean, counselor, social worker, knowing that it's not just meant to be punitive and to punish the behavior out of them, but also what's the root cause? What can we do to support you in other ways? It is ran by, at West, a social worker, Wanda Turner, and a counselor at Central, Katie Breck, as well as 2 paras, 1 at each building. So some of the program activities, there is academic support that is, we are asking to maintain, if not improve, a student's academic performance. When we meet with the family and they're agreeing upon the program or we're offering the program, we show right away, like, this is one of the reasons we want to keep you in the building, so that they see it's not just about the behavior, but we have some academic supports. You're going to have access to your teachers. We will have the teachers come down during their plan periods. We'll make sure that they're looking at Google Classroom. It's not just being ignored, and we print out the grades and show it to them, because we want to see that we're maintaining, if not improving, their academic performance, instead of putting external suspension, where many times students will not maintain their academics during that time. We also do have a period of post-secondary development, so they understand what they do currently can impact their potential, one way or the other, positive or negative. We do community service, which is done within the building. It's giving back to the building in a positive way. Many times we try to link it to the actual behavior, so maybe there was a situation with a teacher or it happened in a teacher's classroom. We try to do something for that teacher. It helps build that relationship, have the student look at the student in a more positive way, and give them an opportunity to get linked to the building. Mediation is a possibility through this, depending on the infraction. So we do try to make sure there's a mediation or a victim impact, where we can reflect on that behavior and fix any harm. There's also daily communication to the family, again, to make sure that they understand. There's a lot of trust when you send a student after they've had an incident back into the building, so there is daily communication home, so they know what they've worked on, and if there's anything that they could be working on overnight, or conversations that they can follow up with the student when they come home. So this is the breakdown. This is Central's data. And this is West's data. Some indicators of success is, yes, that we're keeping kids in building. Some students would have been facing a 10-day or even a 3-day out of school. So we saved days, which is some of the successes. Also, obviously, we're able to build relationships with students when we're in the building. Many students walk into the program very reluctantly, and as our post surveys will say, they're happy they did it. Many times they're requesting to stay in longer because it's a structured setting, that they don't have all the noise of the, the social, after infraction, many times social media is blowing up, so they are grateful to have that time to be with somewhat in isolation with, they sometimes are with other students, but it is a time for them to work on themselves. Areas of improvement, I think we probably can all look at those numbers where they are disproportionate. We do need to look at how we can improve upon that, just as we did our external suspension. One of the areas that is kind of hot off, we just came back from investing in 8 of our counselors into our ASCA training today. Many things, our counselor's role has changed very much from just an academic support over the last, 5 to 10 years, to how are we going to support when we pull data that we see, not just academic, but also attendance and behavioral. What is the role of the counselor, and how can they proactively support students when those indicators are there? So before they get to Catalyst, before we're going through the program, what other things can we do that's not just a dean's initiative? A counselor and social worker can make sure that they are taking that data and making it more useful during their triangle teams. And I think we came back with it was a four-day training that was, I think we're coming back with some great ideas, and hopefully we'll be back to you very quickly with some really good ideas. Ooh. So going over purpose, which I think I interject throughout, is yes, to create that safe space, provide support, because it is pretty overwhelming, even after a student has done something that initially could be a fight, and they could, be saving face about something. They don't, most times, they are pretty distraught after, they've been in a situation that can be pretty egregious.
This is the cool down room.
Oh, yes, it is. Thank you. All right, any question about Catalyst? No?
I think it's a great program. Looking at the numbers of kids, once they complete it, like how many go up for expulsion after all these kids have gone through the program, like this is great, and we should be really proud of this.
I do want to highlight something with the refusal, because I've been able to sit in quite a few of the meetings as well, or if a student is refusing, they do have to sign off on it, and I'm usually part of the conversation. There has been times where a parent has wanted a student to do it, and the student is refusing to do it. They've left meetings, the parent has been there in tears, really encouraging them to do it, and they've not wanted to do it. So there has been occurrences like that where the student is unwilling to, but I would like to continue to see what we can do to get parents and students to not deny the program.
So I have a question actually regarding that.
Sure.
And I know this, we married this program with Plainfield, and I think you addressed this when we first started talking about Catalyst. But is there a reason why we cannot, again, at a later time, if they do refuse, is there any way, or even just to bring it back as a possibility, is that something we could change?
So if they refuse it and then they have another incident, you mean, or?
If they refuse it and then they come back, and can it be looked at as an option again? Or is it, because right now it's only one refusal, you're done. Like, is it possible that they could change their mind and go ahead and take it anyway, be offered again?
Do you mean like
Right now,
a day or two later, or do you mean like after they've done the suspension, still offering the program because they're still going to get something
either
from
way,
that?
either way.
Yeah,
Because right
so-
now, you're not, you get one refusal.
So
and that's it.
when a student is, say we're offering the Catalyst program, they decline it, and they go home for 3 days. And when they come back, we have a reentry meeting with our deans. And at one point, we discussed that earlier. But, so a reentry then can put supports into place. So meeting with the counselor, introducing a group, doing those follow-ups. Now, if we suggest going, oh, you know what, we've really thought about this over the 3 days, we do want to do the Catalyst program, you have to consider now we're removing a student from a classroom for 6 days. And that would be our concern, I think, of then suggesting that that's a good idea, because academically, now you're removing from even a longer period of time. But that doesn't mean that we don't make recommendations to BHT or a group, or, meeting with the counselor or social worker more often.
And I'm aware of all that, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if it could ever, or if there was another infraction, if it could be offered later on, because again, right now, it's not.
Right.
Could we
Like
look at that?
a day in or 2 days in, calling back and saying, now that you've had time about this, is
It's a
this
great
something you're
program.
still interested in? Really just pushing it to get back to the program. So even if, we don't want them to be out the 6 days, but like, if they're supposed to be out 6 days and it's day 4, can we call them to see if we can get them back in, or day 3, get them back in?
That'd be great to look at, just.
Because these numbers are impressive.
I think,
Yeah.
I think that has to be on the table, and we talked about being more persistent in that way, especially if it was a long-term suspension like that. So that was something when we met this summer that we talked about, so that isn't off the table. Really going into this year, a couple of things we were worried about since it was our first year implementing it is, like, are we gonna have too many kids in Catalyst? Like, can we handle this? Can we do that? And so that, for me, that has to be on the table. I think if a kid comes back and they've already served it, they most likely probably wouldn't want to go in.
Yeah.
It might not be a good idea at that point, but if it was a long-term suspension where, like, 6 days or what have you, at day 3, I think it would be okay to call and say, can we
Yeah.
talk about
Well,
this?
even if they did their 3-day suspension, I mean, if you have 113 kids enrolled and only 6 have severe after that, is it worth them missing 3 more days? So we, like, I guess the data, we have to look at the data, is if we have a severe and they refuse the program, what is the reoccurrence rate versus the recurrence rate using the program? So is it beneficial for them to miss it 3 more days if they're not gonna have another reoccurrence?
Yeah, I
Yes.
think we
Right.
would look at that, absolutely. That's why I think it can't be off the table.
Right.
Thank you.
And we're not having huge amounts of refusals, and one of the things that we talked about is, again, how do we have those
Educate.
conversations and maybe more literature so that we can send it home with a parent and then call back the next day. So we're gonna look at how to improve our, how to decrease our refusal rate, first of all, but then, yes, not have that off the table.
Or even kids who have gone through it that may be willing to talk to the kids who wanna refuse it, so they know, again, they're not the only one, that they are
I think
normal.
there's different ways.
Yeah. like if
There's
they-
been times we will offer, obviously meeting with the Catalyst coordinator, but even, why don't you come down and see the program? Will you walk into the room? Because, I mean, you guys may have your own vision of what Catalyst was gonna look like, and you walked into, West Campus and looked at it and was like, okay, this actually immediately looks much different than maybe what I envisioned it to be. So there's, that we have done that in the past, to encourage. Many times that was, well, the parent wanted them to, but the kid wouldn't, so we're like, let's walk down, let's see what it looks
Yep.
like, to try to entice them.
Because these numbers are impressive, and we
Yeah.
just need to get, how much
Mm-hmm.
more can we do with it? So,
Absolutely.
And I mean, I don't want, talking to Ms. Turner for 5 seconds, you're like, yes, I'm in.
She's
Cool.
pretty great,
I
right?
agree with that. Thank you.
All right.
Moving on to cool down.
Cool down room. So as we know, cool down room was at Central 2 years ago when it was piloted, and we brought it to now both campuses. It is to provide a safe place for students who are needing to take a temporary time away from a setting to reset, kind of relook at their social emotional skills, what they can do to cope and re-enter into the classroom. I don't know if everybody has been able to visit our cool-down rooms, but it is a comfortable setting, alternative seating, alternative lighting. It is ran by a social worker who does allow to prompt our students to utilize their coping skills to be able to reset. Sometimes they don't even need to talk. There's a lot of tools in the room for them to then re-enter the classroom. We did implement scanners so that we know and can pull that data very quickly, so that we know how it's being utilized and how fast students are then getting back into the classroom. As you can see, here's the visits throughout Central's data and West's. Individual students by grade level. Total visits by grade level, and then students' feedback. This was also a very, a cultural shift for students to see that we do care about you. We give you a space that is where you don't have to feel like you're isolated in a bathroom setting or in a hallway by yourself. It's giving them an area where they can work directly with staff and be supervised when they're having the need to use their coping skills. Next step is just continuing to communicate with our staff, making sure everybody knows that that is available to our students and how to make sure they're following the procedures to get a student to the room and back. Building flyers, again, this is very similar to Catalyst, not knowing how many students we're going to be bombarding the cool-down room, making sure students aren't misusing the cool-down room. So opening this up further is something that's going to be a goal that we're going to be utilizing throughout this upcoming year. So as you can kind of see throughout there, just making sure that we're updating one another in the triangle teams and how it's being utilized, and then targeting the students who that is being utilized with, and making sure if there's any other interventions, we're making sure that we're offering them so that this isn't the only tool that they're using.
this is great, again, because if you're not in a good headspace, you're not gonna learn. So maybe you miss one class and get in a better headspace and go to the next.
And we also realize that sometimes when we cannot regulate our emotions, that could be times when behaviors occur. So disrespect, peer conflicts. So we're gonna make sure that we're utilizing this data and make sure that if there's anything that, again, a dean, counselor, social worker could be doing, or notifying a teacher if there's a conflict, to prevent behaviors from taking place.
I also want to highlight, and I know you have it on there, but the Institute staff, Institute Day staff roundtables. This was something that we got feedback from staff last year, including the union, with like having different, I'm gonna say tracks or discussion sessions available to learn a little bit more about the interventions that we have that maybe a classroom teacher wouldn't be aware of because they're focused on what their, you know, their role in their classroom and everything. And so we got a lot of feedback, learning about Catalyst, learning about like cool down room, and learning about just other things. So we're gonna do that again at the start of the school year through our Institute days. So cool down room will be one of the things to try and make sure all staff learn more about it, in addition to things like Catalyst and how we're using detention. And it's not just all behavior, it's other programs too, like what we're doing in MTSS too, because it's really helpful if everybody knows more about what we're doing so they can direct kids in the right way.
And all of these things are why I'm proud that my daughter's gonna go here, and I mean, we have some great programs. It's amazing.
Another great program, student support groups. So we have staff, mostly counselors, social workers, on occasion a dean, on occasion other staff members will run a group. And so it's a short-term intervention, general purpose, build connections to the school, establish self-awareness, identify students in need of higher levels. So sometimes we identify students through the group process. And then, you know, because it's a short-term intervention, that really we're just trying to help them develop some skills they can use right away. So these are the central student support groups. I believe it's close to 350 students were serviced this way, with about 29 groups. That's a lot. That's a lot to organize. That's a lot to find space for. That's a lot to just facilitate and organize and plan, but it's good for students. And so even though we have some space issues for our groups, we make it happen. You'll see in the next slide that West had a few less. One of the reasons for that, or the reason for that, is we had one social work intern at Central this year who ran 5 groups herself, and we had another intern that ran a couple. So that really is the difference. And then moving into next year, West is going to have some social work interns, and we have some counselor interns. So here's the West support groups. It's over 250 for West, though, despite the fact that they had a few less groups, so still servicing a lot of students. Students are assigned to these groups through the Triangle team. So dean, social worker, counselor, school psych meet once a week, and if it's determined that this is the best intervention for students, it's assigned through the Triangle team. Some improvements. So we're going to ask we have counselor leads on BHT. We're going to talk about BHT here momentarily, but we have counselor leads. We're going to ask them to have more of a I don't want to say managerial, but they're going to take the lead on trying to find our staff that's best appropriate for each group. That was basically up to Julie and I in the past, and now we're just, they really do have a good feel for that, so we're going to move in that direction. We're going to focus on high enrollment groups like anxiety, stress and coping, things like that. Closer assignment, so I know Wes is going to be making some switches with their counselor and social work, we have specifically counselor and dean caseloads, but essentially, generally speaking, 2 counselors will be assigned to 1 social worker and share the same students. So that generally is going to be a good way to organize our student by alpha last name. And then we're going to be able to improve attendance because of our scanner system that we've talked about before.
So in addition to everything that our staff's doing, we've also, over the last couple of years, added some outside referral resources for mental health supports. So the first one, Care Solace, and both of these, I would just add, we're supplementing through the American Rescue Plan Act, which ends September of 2024. So we'll have to monitor data and make some decisions about what we want to move forward with. But Care Solace essentially is like a concierge service. We know one of the barriers to families engaging in mental health counseling is the process of getting into an appointment. If you had to try to navigate that at all on your own, it's time-consuming, and costly. So this is a service where when you look at this first page of key performance indicators, the amount of communications that this company helps our families with, it's talking to the families, it's also calling around to providers, trying to find the quickest appointment possible. So we have a high usage for Care Solace. There's a breakdown by demographic, age, ethnicity. This is something that's available to staff and community as well. So you will see that it's not all our students' age range that's participating. We have staff participating. We have community members. So that's a positive. And then on the bottom are the reasons that people are utilizing Care Solace. Similar to Care Solace is ThriveWorks. This came on after we adopted Care Solace. Chief Carey and the fire department are doing incredible work for our community with this. The city started this process by bringing ThriveWorks to our community and then providing $400,000 worth of funding to eliminate costs for somebody to participate in this if they're a City of Joliet resident. They renewed that, so they're up to $800,000. We know that some of our students don't live in the city. So you all were gracious enough to allow us to use some of our American Rescue Plan funds to supplement that for our non-Joliet residents. Most of the families participate in telehealth for this just because of the expediency, right? And this page is a breakdown on usage. We've been working with them. They don't typically work with schools, so collecting data was newer to them. But Martha, who lives in Tennessee and is wonderful, Kelly and I met with her recently, very energetic. We started getting her to focus on sending us some data in January. These are just students who use our grant funds, okay? So because the city is paying for Joliet residents, we don't get access to that data. But we know that we have more students using ThriveWorks than this. These are just the students who we're providing funding for.
So as mentioned, when we were talking about triangle teams, behavioral health teams, at each campus we have a behavioral health team. Meets once a week, usually for under 2 hours, and really it's a focused effort on talking about some students who've been referred. So the PPS coordinator, some counselors, social workers, and a psychologist make up that team. Really some good conversations are had about students. Through the BHT, we can refer students to specialized groups, I'll call them, groups with some special curriculum. Sometimes really we've sent through the years our staff for some training, like CBITS, for example. And so our BHT will refer to those groups. Also, our BHT refers to our outside agencies. So we have some partnerships with outside agencies in our community, and so they come in very helpful, and we're able to refer to them. They also communicate really well, so once a month we meet with them. So I think Brett mentioned this, but Amber Mitchell will set up meetings where we just zoom in with them, we get an update. They do a quick review of students, obviously using some confidentiality, but kind of an update on, possible openings and things like that so that we can slide students in need into those spaces. Here are the central referrals. You can see the vast majority of the BHT referrals come from symptoms of anxiety, persistent sad mood, and grief and loss. Here's the central makeup by grade and by, if there was a special funding source for them, like special ed, 504, free or reduced, et cetera. And then here's the demographic makeup. Keep going on West? Okay, I'll keep going with West. So very similar, persistent sad mood, symptoms of anxiety, exposure to trauma. That was a little flip-flopped with the West and Central, but we have quite a few students who are exposed to trauma, and we talk about that often.
They don't even know what it is sometimes, so.
Here's the makeup by grade and by special program, and then the demographic information. So here's our outcomes. includes acceptance to Pathways, so that is one of our slides. So that is something we talk about and make referrals to our Pathway campus. The vast majority of that last bullet point where we talk about did not complete, it comes down to attendance. And when we have specialized community agencies coming into our building, they come in on specialized days and a lot of time on specialized time. And if our students are absent, it takes a week or two for them to try again, and that is, historically, that has been the issue, but we're just trying to work through that best we can. But the vast majority of the failures that are noted there are because of attendance reasons. And then our referrals to the Bravo side, which is the gen ed side of the Pathways. West made 11 referrals, Central Campus made 16, and similar numbers of acceptance. We do anything from tours, we offer tours over there, and so those are the numbers of referrals that were sent over to the Pathways campus.
All right, our home visits. Our home visits, we are looking at a lot of times chronic absenteeism. We've made several attempts to contact the parent via phone calls, emails, emergency contacts. We haven't been able to do that. We do work with our homeless liaisons, our homeless visit liaisons to conduct a home visit. That's a breakdown by campuses. We do want to continue to utilize our home visit liaisons, but provide additional trainings and be more selective about the liaisons that we do bring out, making sure that if there is anybody who has a relationship or had some past conversations, that those are the liaisons that we're utilizing, as well as updating our handout. So if there's additional resources, if the family does not answer the door, that we currently do leave some resources, but we would like to increase our efforts with what we're leaving behind.
Can I just speak real quick to home visits? Sure. And I meant to send an email. I had a parent call me earlier this past year on a Sunday evening, and I recognized the number from the community. I've known her since I was younger, and she called me, and she was very emotional, and actually it would have been towards the end of the year. And she said, "I just want to ask you to say thank you to the staff at Pathways." I said, "Okay, what's going on?" Because at first I thought she was calling to complain, honestly. And so she goes, as she's crying, she goes, "My son is going to graduate soon." And she goes, "And I don't think if they hadn't stopped by my house that he would be graduating now." And she speaks English, but she said she appreciated also that when she started joking in Spanish, they were also able to joke back with her, and they came and took their time, and it was just very significant for her, and that's just one of many, I'm sure, that appreciated those home visits. And again, going back to Ms. Lynn's point, when people understand where you're coming from and you can speak to them in a way they understand, it's really important. So it meant a lot to this mom, and now her child has graduated because of that.
So it's good to hear.
Thank you for sharing that.
Any other questions about that? No?
All right, as we move into wrapping up the presentation, Action Plan 1.5, Restorative Justice Practices. Obviously, the goal here is to create a more systemic approach to restorative practices with the staff as a whole to remove some of those educational barriers. One thing that I am excited about moving forward is that Mr. Markham and myself, this is going to be normal practice with new teacher orientation moving forward. So for example, this year, we know that 37 new staff members at JTHS, whether they're Joliet Central, Joliet West, Transition Center, Pathways, certified staff as far as teachers or just support staff that don't have instructional settings, they are going to be going through some of these adoptions as far as these practices go. So I am excited about that we got the green light from Ms. McDonald for us to move forward with that, so that should help immensely moving forward. As far as the action plans, 1.5, Brett and I have been discussing this. We are the owners of 1.5, and we are going to be implementing some of these for the 23-24 school year. As a matter of fact, we are meeting with Dr. Guzman tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. to solidify our plan moving into August.
Just some of the focus areas we wanted to share with you, and a lot of these are aligned to our earlier conversation, right? So we want to collect feedback from everybody. That's an important part of building trust in the community is giving everybody a voice in the process. So we're working on surveys, focus groups for staff, parents, students to collect some of that and inform our work. So hoping to do that early in the school year. We've talked about this earlier in the year when we talked about the Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee. That's our avenue to talk about the types of infractions that we have, the type of responses that we have to infractions. So now that we're not in strategic planning, we're going to start that earlier this year, spread out the meetings so that they're more accessible. So hopefully that helps with involvement with that committee, but that, again, is the opportunity to really talk about policy-wise, how are we going to respond to infractions, right? So that's our arena for that conversation, and anybody who's been on it the last 2 years knows that I'm really excited about that part of the conversation. And then also just working with our students. So I know that Shad and Takar are both talking about student leadership groups at each campus and how we can utilize them, utilize our leaders who are students to not just give us information, but also to help us work with all of the students in the building so that we can create a climate that is more conducive to learning. And again, continuing with our restorative justice cohorts with classroom teachers. I would add cultural responsiveness as a part of restorative justice. They're not separate things. They're not siloed initiatives. It's one thing. And so that is another part of the new teacher orientation as well. In addition to this is that they're also learning those cultural responsiveness as they're being onboarded into the district. So we have common language and common approaches to supporting our students.
I know there were a lot of questions asked throughout. Does anybody have any additional questions?
You don't have any student like equity action committee already? This is something that you're looking at
So
starting?
I think that it's been something that's existed at both campuses before. I think coming back from COVID, now it's time to just refresh it as the conversation that we kind of had.
Before, and that we didn't reestablish it after COVID, but it's been a goal, and now it's going to happen.
Is it like a sponsored club, or it will be something kind of separate, more leadership type?
We called it Student Voice, and it was like a representative group of students, just to talk about to get feedback about how things are going, and to talk about initiatives and ideas and proposals for changes in practices or policies, and then make sure that we're hearing from, the largest group in our buildings, which are the students. So.
And then is the plan to have that group do some work with other students, like?
Eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
To be honest, we did it for 1 year, and then COVID came.
Okay.
And I need to pick it up again. So we were very much ground level when we did it, but we're going to get it going again.
Okay. Student voice is really important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the benefit of being at the high school, as you know, right? That we have, our students are close to being adults. They think they're adults sometimes. And so, it's an opportunity for us to get their input for sure. Some of the other action plans that are being adopted are also going to impact everything that we've talked about for the last however long we've been up here. So like 2.2 is about programming. We can't have enough interventions and programs. 3.2 is the attendance strategy. That's going to involve, 3.2 and 1.5 are going to have a lot of alignment because it's about creating connection to the school. So I think, we've seen some progress, not even close to what we need to be, but we're really going to start picking up momentum now that we have a strategic plan in place after being without one for a year. So.
I just want to, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
If anything, I just want to apologize because sometimes I can be defensive. When we came on this board, seeing what the board had done before I ever got here, learning about the programs, then seeing we've doubled our social workers, we've like tripled, quadrupled our interventions. We not only have our groups that happen during the day, and I was thinking about this, why did my brothers and my sister, or specifically my brothers, do so well at JT and myself? And it was the groups that we also had, the connections, CASA, Central Against Substance Abuse, a no-name club at Joliet West, and all of these different groups that helped us, starting the LGBTQ and allied community, the Environmental Awareness Club, all of these things that taught us, like, what it looked like to care about your community and love your fellow student and neighbor. And, you know, those are things that we really needed, and they changed our lives for the better. And we are cycle breakers. And I think right now, just looking at all the therapists that I work with, and just like we're seeing burnout with education, thank you, educators and nurses and social workers, it's daunting. And then I think about people like Cuddy. I want to come after him and tell him, I hope he goes bankrupt one day. It's a systemic issue. It really is. And all of these social ills, and when we look at poverty and just free meals and how that ties together with our students that are experiencing violence, committing violence, it really does go together, and it is daunting. So I just want to say thank you for all this work that you've done and that you do, and I hope that we just continue to move on, and you are appreciated. And on your most overwhelmed day, I just want to say thank you again. Your staff, because some of them are still there, changed my life. My Mr. Randage, all the teachers, and what you're doing now, like all these people that stepped in, it's just important that you know that you're appreciated, and we thank you, and you're doing big work. And when I look at all the other schools around us, I'm just grateful to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our superintendent report.
Now we can move into action items. Action item A, resolution supporting tax rebate agreement for lithium-ion battery production facility development by Joliet Township High School District 204. May I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Questions, comments?
And Doug Pryor's here if anyone has any questions. He learned a lot tonight.
I might have questioned myself out.
Read 180. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Questions, comments?
Is this only being utilized in special ed classes or in other MTSS or Tier 2 or Tier 3?
It's specific to the classes right now, the reading for everyday living, so that's where it's specific for.
And that's a special ed instructional class?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we have multiple classes that focus on literacy, so this is a tool to be used in that class.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Mrs. Lynn?
Yes.
Mrs. Guerrero-Numer?
Yes.
Dr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes.
Action item C, intergovernmental agreement between SAS and Joliet Township High School District 204.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Questions, comments? Roll call, please.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes.
Mrs. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Mrs. Lynn?
Yes.
Mrs. Guerrero-Numer?
Yes.
Dr. Huntington?
Yes.
Action item D, JTHS activity and club proposal and changes recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Questions, comments?
I just had a question about the IEP managers. There's 4 at each campus. Is that 4 at West, 4 at Pathways, 4 at, or just?
There's 2 at West and 2 at Central and 1 additional, correct? Or is it 4 total? I'd have to go look, but it's 2 at West and 2 at Central, and then I believe our Pathways IEP manager is an administrator. Is the psychologist. So we have 4 dedicated, 2 at West, 2 at Central.
So nobody, there's not a manager for transition or?
They're part of Central, and West covers transition. So they're district-wide, so there's sort of an overflow with a caseload.
Okay. That's.
Roll call.
I just wanted to thank Dr. Hampton and his team in working with the union to look at these each year. This is an annual. And points that were made before, I think these clubs are just really, really important, and I too, am proud of that as a superintendent, but also as a parent, that we continue to look at new and different ways to encourage kids to be engaged in school. I know I've already talked to both my boys who are graduates, and they're very deeply disturbed that there was no D&D club when they were here. But we keep adding these things, and I think it's just really important, and I'm very proud that we recognize that.
I agree. I told my daughter, who's in 8th grade, who does not like joining clubs, that in high school I will make her join at least 2 clubs. So she will find something to be involved in. That's okay.
Roll call, please.
Dr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes.
Mrs. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Mrs. Lynn?
Yes.
Mrs. Guerrero Numer?
Yes.
Action item E, transportation contract with AFSME Council 31, Local 197. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Questions, comments?
Excuse me, yes. This is a recommendation for a one-year contract to roll over the existing language and provisions for 1 year. And we will begin a full opening of the contract for next school year sometime in September. So the recommendation is for a 4% increase, and this union group represents transportation.
I'd like to thank all the bus drivers and everything that they do for us, and I miss their shortage for staying with us and being here.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Guerrero Numer?
Yes.
Dr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes.
Mrs. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Mrs. Lynn?
Yes.
Action item F, memorandum of agreement with transportation regarding transportation attendance. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Questions, comments?
Yes, this is a recommendation to continue the memorandum of agreement for perfect attendance for transportation for the upcoming school year.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Lynn?
Yes.
Mrs. Guerrero Numer?
Yes.
Dr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes.
Mrs. Smith? Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Starting the year right.
Action item G, personnel reports 1 through 10. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Question, comments?
I have a question. There's a lot of extra pay recommendations for like PPS staff, and I'm assuming that it's contractual, but the volume, it would seem it would make sense to have a salary schedule that reflected all of those agreements. It's gotta be hard to keep track of all the stipends. Is that something that has ever been considered?
So ask that question again.
So when I was going through the list, there were extended day social worker, extended day counselor, there was extra pay counselor, those kind of things. And it looked to me like everyone that was in this department was getting those stipends. So I'm assuming it's contractual.
Yes.
Okay, so is that because you don't want to have a separate salary schedule for that category?
Oh, yeah. I mean, no, it's just,
Does
it's
that
just the way
make
the
sense?
contract reads. Yeah, it was never recommended to have a separate salary schedule. That is just part of a stipend, so like deans get stipends. So
But that's not something that could change like year to year. That's kind of established in the contract
it
that,
changes from year to year in terms of the amount received.
oh,
So it's tied to the salary, to the actual salary schedule, and then there's a percentage based on the lanes. So they move with the salary schedule.
right, okay. So it doesn't, like, it wouldn't like go away is what I'm saying. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. it's
Seems like a
tied-
lot of extra work.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzpatrick,
Yes.
Mrs. Lynn,
Yes.
Mrs. Guerrero Numer,
Yes.
Dr. Huntington,
Yes.
Mr. Coffey, Mrs. Stiff.
Yes. Unfinished business? None?
No.
New business?
The policies within the board packet, they're for first read. If you have any questions, please let me know. I know I sent out additional information about these policies. Most are just due to legislative changes and so mandates. And then the 5-year review, that's just best practice to look at those every 5 years. So we're prompted to do that. So they'll come back to the board next month for action.
Are there any board reports?
I just wanted to thank the staff. I believe they were district-wide staff for the summer enrichment program. I had the opportunity to go to the celebration, ran in here during lunch. I didn't have a snack, but I was able to meet the presenters and talk to them a little bit more. It was really nice to meet the Reverend, and the kids were so excited to be able to share their work. The video was awesome, so if you hadn't had an opportunity to look that over, it's a good 10 minutes well spent, so 15 maybe.
Thank you.
No other?
I just have one announcement, if that's okay.
I'll move to announcement and public comment.
Thank you, Mrs. The reason I was thinking about the board is, and this was alluded to today, I'm meeting with all of the action planning teams that were adopted. So the board approved 9 of the action plans moving forward, and those owners have been assigned and established. So I actually met with a team today that's working on the school day schedule, which is probably a multi-year plan of research and looking at that. And the reason that I bring it up is because some of the action plans do dictate committees to be formed. And there will be opportunities for board members to be on those committees. Specifically, there will be, and it's dictated through the strategic plan, but the school day committee, which I believe is 4.3, does call for representation of the school board. Just be thinking about that. We also have the parent-teacher advisory committee, which is a board-directed committee as well. So there's probably gonna be multiple opportunities as we're working through strategic plan to be on some of these planning committees. So I'll be sending information out as I work with these teams and they establish their meeting dates. But if there's a specific area you're interested in, just be considering that and then probably talk to Mrs. Stiff. And then we can determine, because usually on those committees, it would be up to 2 board members. So I just wanted to share that. There's good work and good planning being done.
Thank you.
Do you know
Any
when
oth-
those dates will come out, or those different assignments that are necessary?
They're gonna be coming out probably throughout the year, but like, for example, with 4.3, they're establishing the dates, so that information will be coming out very soon.
Share it with us and then
Yep,
we'll tell you.
yep, we're actually working on a, event schedule, an opportunity schedule that I'll share with the Board of Education. So some things will come out before school starts, and then as committees continue their work, they may start a little bit later. But the school day committee, I wanna say their first meeting is like early in September.
I did appreciate Tanya having the written dates and seeing that.
Beautiful.
I did appreciate that.
We're working
Not
on
a
that
problem.
for the
Yep.
whole year.
For the whole year.
Yeah,
Yep,
I
was a
liked that. I'm
project.
a paper person and I go emails and then I don't write it down and then I forget. And it was nice to have it written someplace I can store it.
I would just like to say, as a founder and former member of the Environmental Awareness Club at Joy at Central, we should start being more conscientious of tree use, but anyway.
Well, I
like
tell my
paper, too.
students, not at school.
We'll send it in both ways.
I'd like to know, with the school starting soon, the real problem that we have on 2 fronts, the tardy and the absentee. I'd like to know if we have a plan versus, I know last year it didn't seem to work out real well.
Definitely, I will, and Shad and Takara are the owners of our attendance strategy, so I know they've started to meet as well. As far as attendance, one of the things that, we're working at, implementing this year, and help me team with it, what's the attendance platform that we?
A2A.
Okay. So we, we had some training on this new platform during our DLT summer workshop. We're gonna have additional training. This is the same platform that District 86 is using. So one of the things that we're trying to improve upon and hopefully take some work off, be more effective and efficient with communication about attendance to families. District 86 has found some success with using this platform, and we thought if our families are getting information in similar ways, and some overlap, that might help. So, that is one of the systems and new, I'm gonna say interventions that we're gonna put in place. And it's not just sending, pieces of paper home, there's other components. Setting up, conferences. So there's efficiencies within this platform that we're learning, and that we'll learn probably throughout the year. So that's one thing that we're putting into place. And then I know that, Mr. Hallahan and, Mrs. Parker are going to work on, specific plans for that strategy. So we'll report more, as we're going into the school year, but thinking about incentives, and obviously continuing to use our home visit liaisons, and just really talking to students about how do we engage them more. So I think there's a lot of components to it, but we're hoping that the new platform allows us to then concentrate on like incentives instead of communication all the time. So that's one of the things we're doing with attendance. As far as tardies, when we compare tardies, it's not that tardies got worse this year than the previous year. We were tracking them differently. And so that's still a work in progress, with tardies. I don't know if the team has any more to add, with that, where we're at right now. Anything else? No?
I mean, we hope that having detention in place,
Yeah,
that's
at the
obviously,
start of the school
tardy's
year.
a social issue, right? So you're late to class most of the time when you talk to students because they're socializing instead of going to class, and the hallways are crowded anyway. So hopefully that will help.
The advisory moratorium that we're gonna.
Oh, yeah, so with attendance scanners, one of the most frequent causes of tardies and period absences is advisory. Because we have attendance scanners now, students will have to scan in. So we're doing a 30-day moratorium on passes out of advisory, so everybody will be in their advisory for the first 30 days. We have 2 whole weeks of activities planned in that 30 days. We have Safety Week, which occurs in the first 30 days, and then National Suicide Awareness Week is also in that 30-day moratorium. See something, say something happens. So we're trying to load it up and make advisory more impactful, and just not allowing students out, right? To try to establish positive habits.
And I wanna say too, and I know this was already stated tonight, but when we're talking about the strategic plan, there's so much overlap between the different, plans that were adopted. For example, in meeting with the team, and it's a larger team, trying to attack the school day structure, like things that are in their mind. So for discipline and for tardies, how do we build a schedule that maybe minimizes movement of students throughout the day? Like, so those are considerations that, that team is thinking about too. So I think it's being attacked from all different areas. So I don't think it's just one thing, or, it's a bunch of things that we're gonna just keep trying to attack.
Carla, something we also talked about earlier on, I know we had our 2-hour presentation, but taking a look at our security and our teachers and utilizing them in the hallways from the very get-go. So we have identified pockets in our buildings that tend to be go-to places for our students to hang out, making sure that we're shifting our staff and our security to those places, not just in the hallways, but the cafeteria. We've put lead security now in the cafeteria, so there's the same faces in the cafeteria, noticing at the same students in their second doors, so that if the doors are popped, it's not just, the technology will be indicating it to us so that we will be able to address that right away. Doing that more efficiently, and be able to react to that right away instead of, we've now noticed you've missed now 2 days of that class. No, we're gonna hopefully be able to keep up with that faster by using technology.
My question is, are teachers do they write passes the first 10 minutes, or is there like?
So that's, we've got a whole
Okay.
that we'll go over at Institute.
Okay.
So no passes first 10 and last 10 of class, like just minor tweaks, like the things that we all, COVID really did a number on us, right?
Right.
So getting back to
Right.
basics is really where we're at. Some of this, I think Mr. Johnson presents next month, so a lot of it crosses over to what his team is doing, so you'll hear more about absences and tardies, I'm sure, when he's here in August.
Also, is it possible to invite the ROE in and the truancy officer? Because I know they have one, right, the ROE?
Each campus is assigned truancy. They recently expanded their truancy staff, and that was very helpful this year. I think we would all say that we definitely got more response from them. That definitely is helpful. So the ROE did a great job this year of increasing the support to us as schools to work with families on truancy.
And they came in and they did visits
Yeah,
last
oh yeah.
year.
I mean, it was much more responsive, much quicker. So even though we lost the access to the TAOP program at Lincoln, I think this is better, trying to keep students with us and intervene earlier. So I think that we would all say that was a huge improvement from the ROE.
Are they gonna continue with the new leadership?
I haven't heard anything. I know that they're working through figuring out what they're gonna continue. I know they're continuing. A lot of these resources came from our student support services meeting. Ideas that we share with each other there. I know they're continuing that meeting, so hopefully that's something. I mean, I think truancy is an issue for all schools in our area, so I would hope they continue.
When I met with the new superintendent from the ROE, I've met with her twice. One of the areas I said that I think all of that JT would benefit from, but all area in Will County would benefit from, is a continued focus on attendance and a chronic absenteeism. So I know I was not the only person who shared that, and so we're very hopeful that that continues, because we've said it before, it takes a village, and we will take all the help we can get.
When they put their card on the door, it's a little bit more impactful too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for allowing me to come up to the podium again. I can't.
We just missed him.
Don't tell him that. If there's nothing else, may I have